Tonight, we're not here to fix anything, not to understand everything, not to become someone better before you're allowed to rest. This is a quiet space where we gently let go and return to inner peace through soft Zen stories inspired by the Buddha, shared slowly so your mind can soften and your body can rest. Maybe today asked a little too much from you. Too many thoughts, too many worries, too many small things you tried to hold together. And maybe, just for this moment, you're ready to set them down. Here, you don't need to improve yourself. You don't need to solve tomorrow. You are already enough simply by being here, breathing quietly. Just for a moment. Where are you listening from tonight? Wherever you are, I'm grateful you're here, sharing this quiet space. Let your breath slow as if it remembers the way home. Let your shoulders soften like they no longer need to carry the world. Tonight, we'll listen to a simple story. A story from ordinary life, carrying a small thread of Zen and Buddhist wisdom. Not to give you more to think about, but to help you loosen your grip. Because suffering rarely ends by force. It softens when we stop holding it so tightly. There's nothing to rush, nothing to achieve, only a gentle drifting into rest, into stillness. Whether you stay awake or slowly fall asleep, this moment is already enough. And now, we begin tonight's journey with these Zen stories. There are moments when fear doesn't come from what is happening, but from what might happen. It doesn't need proof. It only needs space. And at night, when everything quiets down, that space feels wider than usual. Brian finished his shift a little before 2 in the morning. He was a paramedic, 29 years old, used to fluorescent lights, the smell of antiseptic, and the steady beeping of machines. When he stepped into the back stairwell of the hospital, one that hardly anyone used, he stopped on one of the steps. Not because his legs were tired, but because his mind hadn't caught up with his body yet. The stairwell was quiet. Just the vending machine at the end of the hall coughing out a dry mechanical sound now and then falling silent again. Brian sat down, leaned his back against the cold wall, took off his gloves and slipped them into his jacket pocket. In that same pocket was a strawberry-flavored snack bar, something he'd bought quickly at the start of his shift and never got around to eating. He unwrapped it slowly. There was nothing special about it. A small snack mildly sweet, not enough to count as a meal. But when he took the first bite, the strawberry flavor spread through his mouth more clearly than he expected. Not because it tasted better than usual, but because this was the first time in hours that he was actually feeling something that wasn't urgent. The images from his shift were still vivid in his mind. Moments right on the edge. Questions with no immediate answers. Futures that hadn't happened yet but had already been imagined in countless ways. He was used to standing between two sides, living and not living, okay and not okay. And because he was used to it, fear no longer arrived as a shock. It came like a slow current, quiet constant, always there. There was an old story Brian had heard somewhere, though he couldn't remember from whom, about a person who falls off a cliff, clinging to a branch danger above a deep abyss below. And in that moment, the person notices a strawberry growing out of the cliffside. Red, ripe, sweet. Hanging there between life and death, the person reaches out, picks the strawberry, and eats it. Brian didn't think of the story as a metaphor. He only noticed that he was in a familiar place between a past that had just ended and a future that hadn't arrived yet. Between what could have happened and what might still happen. And right in the middle of that space was the taste of strawberry slowly dissolving on his tongue. Fear often tells us, be prepared. Think more. Imagine it ahead of time so you won't be caught off guard. But Brian's body in this moment didn't need to prepare for anything. It just needed to sit there, lean against the wall, and chew slowly. He looked down at his hands. The faint marks from his gloves were still pressed into his skin, small signs of how tightly he'd been holding on for hours. He opened his hand, then closed it again, without any real purpose, just to feel the difference between gripping and letting go. Some fears can't be erased with positive thinking. They only soften when we stop running ahead of them. When we stop living a few hours, a few days, or a few years into the future and come back to where we actually are. Not because this place is perfectly safe, but because it's the only place that's real. Brian leaned his head back and closed his eyes for a moment. Not for long, just long enough for his breathing to slow down. He didn't count breaths or follow any technique. He let his lungs do what they already knew how to do. Somewhere in the distance, an ambulance siren passed by, then faded away. The world kept moving. It didn't need him to hold it together. He opened his eyes and looked at the nearly finished snack bar, something very small, very ordinary, but enough to bring him back to this moment. Not to erase fear, but to see that even inside fear, there can still be sweetness. Not always obvious, but real. Brian stood up and brushed the dust off his pants. He didn't think about tomorrow. He didn't think about his next shift. He didn't think about what might happen next. He just took each step up the stairwell, one at a time, out into the cooler night air, and let his body lead the way. Maybe peace isn't about never standing near the edge of a cliff. Maybe it's about noticing the strawberry right in front of you, even while you're there. Outside the hospital, the night had settled in its own quiet way. Not completely silent, but spaced out enough that each sound stood on its own. Brian stepped into the parking lot and paused for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the dark. Streetlights spread small circles of light across the asphalt, uneven, unhurried. He opened his car door and sat in the driver's seat, but didn't start the engine right away. His hands rested on the steering wheel, the cool surface pressing into his palms. An old habit nudged at him to turn the key to leave quickly, as if standing still for too long meant wasting time. But tonight, that habit wasn't as strong as usual. Brian leaned back into the seat and let out a breath. Not deep, not long, just a breath that wasn't being held. He noticed his shoulders had dropped since leaving his shift. His chest no longer felt as tight as it had in the stairwell. Fear was still somewhere nearby, but it wasn't standing right in front of him anymore. It had stepped back far enough to make room for other things. Fear tends to exaggerate the future. It sketches out scenes that haven't arrived yet, then asks us to live as if they're already certain. But as Brian sat here in a car with the engine off, the future was only a vague idea. No clear images, no specific sounds, just the present moment unfolding in a very ordinary way. The car's seat, the steering wheel, the streetlights, and a body slowly softening. He thought about the shift he'd just finished, not in order, not analytically. Just a few fragments drifting through and drifting away. There were things he couldn't control, moments where he'd done everything he could, details left unfinished. But tonight there was no need to gather them into a complete story. Brian started the car. The engine hummed, then settled. He drove slowly out of the parking lot and onto the empty road. Traffic lights changed colors even though no one was waiting. The city kept doing its job whether or not anyone was paying attention. As the car moved forward, a light thought appeared, then faded. Maybe I don't need to see the whole road ahead. Just the part I'm on right now. The streetlights lit up a few dozen yards at a time. The rest would come later in its own time. Brian loosened his grip on the steering wheel just a little. He didn't let go. He just didn't squeeze. The car moved steadily. The feeling was familiar and unfamiliar at once, like realizing you don't have to strain for things to keep working. Some changes arrive quietly. They don't come as big decisions. They show up when you stop resisting the moment you're in. When you allow yourself to stay with uncertainty without rushing to label it as danger. Brian turned on the radio, then turned it off again. The silence inside the car felt better. He noticed that his breathing had become steady without him trying. No pauses, no rush, just the breath of someone driving home after a long day. In the old story about the cliff and the strawberry, what people remember isn't the abyss below or the danger above. It's the moment the person stops, tastes the sweetness, and is truly present. Not because death is forgotten, but because it's not allowed to take over the moment of living. Brian didn't think he had overcome fear. He only knew that tonight fear wasn't driving. It was sitting somewhere in the back seat, quieter than before. And that was enough. The car turned onto a familiar street. Houses with their lights off, a few windows still glowing softly. Life moving at many different rhythms without needing to sync up. Brian parked, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment before getting out. Maybe tomorrow would bring difficult things. Maybe there would be more moments standing close to the edge. But not all of those moments would be empty. Somewhere nearby there would still be strawberries ripening. Brian opened the car door and stepped out. The night air was cool, the street was calm. He closed the door gently and walked toward his home. Not faster, not slower, just at the right pace. And if one day you find yourself standing between fear and the unknown, maybe you don't need to look for an escape right away. Maybe you can pause for a moment and notice that something very small, very sweet is still here with you. Anger doesn't always explode like fire. Sometimes it just smolders like a small hot coal hidden in the palm of your hand. No one can see it. No one knows it's there. but the person holding it can always feel the heat. And the strange thing is, the tighter you grip it, the more you believe you're staying in control. Miguel knew that feeling well. 45 years old, a line cook in a small restaurant used to long shifts and late nights. That evening, after clocking out, he didn't go straight home. He walked slowly along his usual street, where the streetlights formed soft, uneven circles on the sidewalk. The air was cool enough to dry the sweat on his skin, but not cool enough to calm what was heating up inside him. His right hand absent-mindedly rubbed the center of his left palm. There was a faint scar there left over from an oil burn years ago. It didn't hurt anymore. But every time he touched it, the memory of that sharp sting came back clearly, just like the anger he was carrying now. Not new, not explosive, just something he had never really set down. It had started with a comment in the kitchen. No raised voices, no argument, just a short remark said while he was at his busiest. Miguel had stayed quiet then, nodded, kept working. But the anger didn't disappear. It followed him out of the restaurant, clinging to every step, every breath. He replayed the comment in his mind. Then he imagined how he should have responded. Then he ran through a few more made-up scenarios. Each time his chest tightened a little more. Not because of the other person, but because he was adding fuel to a fire that was already there. Miguel stopped at a street corner. The sound of cars in the distance flowed steadily, like a quiet current. He opened his hand and looked at his palm under the soft yellow light. There was no coal there, just skin and old scar and the natural warmth of his body. And yet the heat still felt real. There are times when we believe we're holding on to anger to protect ourselves. That if we let go, we'll lose our ground. That if we don't hold on, the other person will never understand how much they hurt us. But we rarely stop to ask, while we're waiting for them to understand, who is the one getting burned. Miguel let out a slow breath. Not a deep, effortful one, just a slightly longer exhale. His shoulders dropped almost imperceptibly. His feet kept moving, but at a gentler pace. He realized he'd been clenching his hand the entire walk without noticing. He remembered the burn from years ago. When hot oil splashed onto his hand, his first reaction wasn't to clench. It was to let go, to drop the knife, to set the pan down, to let his hand cool, to keep the damage from getting worse. No one had taught him that. His body already knew, and yet with anger he had done the opposite. He held it, turned it over in his mind, carried it with him as if it were an essential part of the story. But anger didn't make the story clearer. It only made the storyteller more tired. Miguel slowed again, then stopped completely beneath a streetlight. His shadow stretched long across the pavement. He opened his hand once more this time, with a little more awareness. Not to achieve anything, just to feel the difference between gripping and opening. Nothing magical happened. The anger didn't vanish. But there was a very small moment when he realized he didn't need to keep hurting himself just to prove that he had been hurt. The heat stopped increasing, and that alone was already a change. Miguel turned toward home. The street looked the same, the lights were the same, but his steps were a little lighter than before. Not because everything was resolved, but because he had stopped holding so tightly. Some nights we don't need to forgive. We don't need deep understanding. We don't need a conversation. We just need to put the hot coal down first. The rest can wait. Miguel got home after midnight. The small apartment was quiet with only a dim kitchen light glowing softly just enough so he didn't need to turn on anything else. He hung his jacket on the hook slowly, as if he didn't want to make a single unnecessary sound. Sometimes quiet isn't emptiness. Sometimes it's a place where the body finally stops being on guard. He washed his hands under the faucet. The water was warm, steady, flowing over the palm where the old scar still lived. Miguel let the water run longer than usual, not to clean, but to feel the difference between hot and warm, between burning and soothing. And something very simple became clear to him. Not every sensation needs to be endured. Some only need to be cooled at the right moment. He turned off the water, dried his hands, and stood there for a moment by the sink. There was no thought to chase, no story to continue, just an ordinary pause, the kind that happens when you finally set down something you've been holding for too long. Miguel walked into the living room and sat down. Street light outside the window cast slow shifting patches of light across the wall. He didn't turn on the TV. He didn't check his phone. Those things could wait until tomorrow. Tonight, nothing needed to be filled. The anger was still somewhere nearby, but it wasn't in his hands anymore. It felt like something placed off to the side, still there, but no longer taking up space. When it wasn't being carried, it naturally felt lighter. Not because he had defeated it, but because he had stopped feeding it. He remembered other nights when anger followed him into sleep. The restless tossing, the broken dreams. The mornings when his body felt exhausted despite doing nothing physical. Holding on to anger was like keeping a fist clenched all night long. No one sees it, but in the morning, the fingers ache. Miguel leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes. Not trying to sleep, not forcing himself to relax. Just letting his body find the least tense position on its own. His shoulders dropped a little more, his jaw unclenched. His breath moved in slowly, then flowed out longer, as if there was no longer anything urgent. There's something few people notice about anger. It doesn't need to be pushed away. It only needs a little distance from the skin. With enough space, it stops burning. It becomes just another feeling passing through like so many others that have come and gone. Miguel opened his eyes and looked around the familiar room. Nothing had changed. Everything was still there. But the way he was inside the space had shifted. He wasn't carrying the need to fix, to react, to prove anything. He was just here right now in a body slowly settling down. He stood up and walked toward the bedroom. His steps were lighter, not because the floor was different, but because he wasn't dragging the weight of anger with him anymore. When he lay down, he didn't think about the other person. He didn't replay the comment. He didn't plan what he would do differently tomorrow. Those things could return, or they might not. But tonight, he didn't need to bring them into sleep. Some nights, forgiveness doesn't arrive as a big decision. It arrives quietly in something very small, like choosing not to hold the hot coal for one more minute. Not because the other person deserves it, but because your hand is already tired, already burned. Miguel turned onto his side, settling into a familiar position. The blanket rested lightly on his shoulder. The air in the room was just cool enough. His eyelids grew heavy, not from sudden drowsiness, but because nothing was pulling him awake anymore. If anger comes back another time, that's okay. It isn't an enemy. It's only a sign that something once hurt. But tonight, you don't need to hold that sign close. You can set it down the way you'd place a hot object out of your hand and let your skin rest. The room slowly sank into quiet. No conclusions, no promises, just a body allowed to settle into its safest rhythm. And in that stillness, sleep can arrive, naturally. Some kinds of tiredness don't come from doing too much. They come from quietly believing you're still not enough. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a my life is falling apart way. Just a low, steady feeling that you need to keep proving yourself. Keep earning your place. Keep fixing something about who you are. Chris had lived with that feeling for years. He was 42, worked in IT support for a mid-sized company. The kind of job where people only noticed you when something went wrong. Most days he moved through tickets and emails quietly, fixing other people's problems, resetting passwords, keeping systems running so smoothly no one had to think about them. By the end of the day, his shoulders always felt a little tight, like they were holding something up even after work was done. That evening, Chris sat at his small desk in the corner of his apartment. The overhead light was off. Only a desk lamp was on, casting a soft circle of light across the wood surface. Outside traffic hummed in the distance, steady and far away, like the city breathing on its own. His laptop was open, but he wasn't really looking at it. An inbox sat half cleared. A few messages he meant to answer later. Nothing urgent, nothing on fire. Still, his chest felt restless. Chris leaned back in his chair and reached for the hoodie hanging on the back. It was old, soft, the kind of hoodie you don't throw away because it still feels like home. As he pulled it on, his fingers brushed against something inside the pocket. He paused. There was a small weight there, familiar but unexpected. Chris slid his hand into the pocket and pulled out a coin. Not a valuable one. Just a worn, slightly scratched coin he'd carried around for years without thinking much about it. A friend had given it to him a long time ago after a rough patch, saying something like, "Just keep it with you. You don't need a reason." Chris rolled the coin between his fingers. The metal was warm now, shaped slightly by time. He couldn't remember the last time he'd actually noticed it. It was strange how something could be with you for so long and still feel forgotten. He held the coin in his palm and let his hand rest on the desk. The lamplight caught the edges, dull but steady. Nothing special to look at. Nothing that would impress anyone. And yet, there it was. Present, real, already his. Chris didn't think anything profound. He didn't suddenly feel confident or healed. But something inside him slowed just a little. All day he had been moving through the world as if he needed permission to take up space. As if his worth depended on being useful. Being needed, being noticed at the right moments. Sitting there now, he noticed how automatic that habit was. How easily his mind went to questions like, did I do enough today? Did I say the right thing? Did anyone really see me? None of those questions felt loud. They were quiet, practiced, almost polite. Chris closed his hand gently around the coin, not squeezing it, just holding it, feeling its shape against his skin. There's a story in old traditions about someone who wandered for years, poor and exhausted, begging for scraps, never realizing that a priceless jewel had been sewn into the lining of his own clothing the whole time. Chris didn't know that story. He didn't need to. He only felt the simple truth of the moment. Nothing had changed about him in the last 10 minutes. He hadn't achieved anything, hadn't fixed himself, hadn't become more impressive. And yet sitting there, he didn't feel as empty as before. He set the coin back into the pocket and zipped the hoodie halfway up. The fabric brushed against his neck, familiar and grounding. He rested his elbows on the desk and let his gaze soften, not really focused on anything in particular. Outside, a car passed. Somewhere, a door closed. Life kept moving without asking anything from him. Chris noticed his breathing without trying to control it. In and out. A little slower now. A little deeper, without effort. It occurred to him that maybe his exhaustion didn't come from lacking something. Maybe it came from constantly reaching for what was already here. The thought didn't demand agreement. It didn't try to convince him. It simply passed through like a quiet observation and left space behind it. Chris leaned back again, chair creaking softly. He didn't rush to stand up, didn't rush to do anything at all. For the first time that evening, he let himself be exactly as he was, without adding a silent requirement to improve. Chris stayed there for a while longer, not doing anything in particular. The desk lamp hummed faintly, the kind of sound you only notice when the room gets quiet enough. His laptop screen dimmed on its own, then went dark. He didn't reach out to wake it. The room felt softer without the light from the screen. Shadows settled into their places. Nothing demanded his attention. He stood up slowly and walked toward the window. The glass was cool when he rested his fingertips against it. Down below, a few apartment lights were still on. Others had gone dark. People ending their days in their own quiet ways. Chris had spent years believing that value came from being seen, from being useful, from being the one who had the answer when something broke. But standing there now, he noticed how none of that was required in this moment. The world wasn't asking him to prove anything. It was just continuing. He let his forehead rest lightly against the window for a second, then stepped back. The hoodie hung loosely on his shoulders. The pocket felt heavier than it should have, not because the coin weighed much, but because he was finally aware of it. He moved to the couch and sat down, letting his body sink into the cushions. The fabric creaked softly, then settled. One leg tucked under the other without him thinking about it. His arms rested at his sides, hands open. It was strange how unfamiliar that felt. Open hands, not holding onto a task, not gripping a thought. A memory floated up uninvited. A younger version of himself trying to be quieter, trying not to take up space, learning early that approval felt like safety. The memory didn't sting. It didn't need analysis. It just passed through like a shadow moving across the floor. Chris noticed something else then. Even in the middle of all those years of trying, something in him had never actually been missing. Tired, yes, doubting often, but not broken. The coin in his pocket hadn't made him valuable. It hadn't changed who he was. It had simply reminded him of something that was already true. He closed his eyes for a moment, not to meditate, just to rest them. The room didn't disappear. It stayed steady and quiet around him. His breathing found its own rhythm. In through the nose, out through the mouth. No counting, no correction. Just the body doing what it knows how to do when it's allowed to stop performing. Thoughts came and went. A half-formed plan for tomorrow, a grocery list, a line from a song he couldn't quite remember. None of them stayed long. None of them needed an answer. There was a gentle relief in realizing that wholeness didn't feel like excitement. It felt like not having to reach anymore. Chris shifted slightly on the couch and felt the coin press against his hip. He smiled barely. Not because it was meaningful, but because it was simple. So much of his life had been spent looking outward, measuring himself against reactions, responses, silence. Tonight there was nothing to measure. The city sounds faded further into the background. A car door slammed somewhere far away. Then, nothing again. He stood up and walked toward the bedroom. He didn't bring his phone, didn't bring his thoughts about tomorrow. Just his body a little heavier in a good way, like something finally set down. When he lay on the bed, he didn't try to arrange himself perfectly. He let the mattress meet him where it did. The sheets were cool at first, then warm. His shoulders sank. His jaw loosened. The jewel in the pocket stayed where it was. It didn't need to be taken out. It didn't need to be admired. Some things don't need attention to keep shining. They just need to stop being forgotten. Chris breathed in once more, slowly, and let the breath go without holding on to it. Nothing needed to be added. Nothing needed to be earned. Nothing was missing. The night held everything else. Sometimes anxiety doesn't arrive like a storm. It comes much more quietly, like a string that's been pulled tight all day long. By evening, it doesn't snap. It doesn't make a sound. It just vibrates faintly inside, just enough to keep you from fully resting. You're not panicking. You still do everything you're supposed to do. But when the day is over, when the house is quiet, when no one needs anything from you anymore, that string still hasn't loosened. Susan knows that feeling well. She's 49, a mid-level manager at a large company, the kind of person whose calendar is full a week in advance. That evening, she's sitting alone at the kitchen table. The overhead light is off. Only a small lamp casts a soft glow onto the wooden surface. In front of her is a printed performance review folded neatly in half, placed carefully, like something that needs to be dealt with. Beside it sits a cup of tea that went cold a while ago. In the quiet kitchen, the wall clock sounds louder than usual. Tick, tock. Each beat a reminder that time keeps moving, whether she moves with it or not. Susan reaches out and touches the paper, smoothing the crease with her fingers, then stops. She's already read it 3 times today. Nothing unexpected. A few compliments. A few bullet points for improvement. The kind of language she could almost predict before reading it. And yet, her chest still feels tight. Not because she's afraid of losing her job. Not because anyone blamed her. Just that familiar sense of not being enough. Not good enough. Not fast enough. Not careful enough. As if there's an invisible force constantly pulling the string inside her a little tighter, just in case it can still hold. Susan lifts the cup and takes a small sip, then sets it back down when she realizes it's cold. She doesn't get up to reheat it. She just watches the faint steam on the ceramic fade into the air. For a brief moment, she notices her shoulders are raised. Not from the cold, but from tension. She lets them drop gently, almost without thinking. And just from that small movement, her breath deepens slightly. Some strings, if they're too loose, make no sound. But if they're pulled too tight, no one else has to pull them anymore. They start hurting themselves. Not out of malice, just from trying to do their job for too long. Susan isn't thinking about philosophy. She's just looking at the paper in front of her and realizing she's reading it like a verdict, not a work note. Each bullet point is tied to a familiar voice in her head. I should have done better. Why didn't I think of that sooner? Someone else would have handled this better. She folds the paper again more carefully this time and sets it off to the side of the table out of reach. Not putting it away forever, just not keeping it right in front of her. That small action creates a strange kind of space, like setting down something heavy and realizing you've been carrying it longer than you thought. Susan leans back in her chair. The wooden back is firm, not comfortable, but solid enough to support her. She closes her eyes for a moment, then opens them again. She isn't trying to meditate. She isn't trying to calm herself down. She's just sitting there in her familiar kitchen under the warm light, with the clock still ticking at its steady, unhurried pace. There's something people rarely say about those who worry a lot. They don't worry because they enjoy it. They worry because they've grown used to holding everything together. And when they loosen their grip even a little, it feels like they're doing something wrong. As if the moment they stop holding on, everything will fall apart. Susan opens a drawer and takes out a pen, turning it slowly between her fingers. The soft sound of plastic brushing against itself barely registers. She thinks about tomorrow, the meeting, the tasks, the things that could happen. And then unexpectedly, she realizes she doesn't need to solve all of it right now. Not because it doesn't matter, but because this moment isn't meant for pulling the string any tighter. She sets the pen down. Both hands rest on the table, feeling the cool surface beneath her palms. One breath comes in. One breath goes out. Not much deeper than usual. Just slower, as if her body is quietly finding its way back to balance. Not too tight, not giving up. If you're listening to this and recognize yourself in the habit of holding everything too tightly, that's okay. You don't need to completely let go. You only need to stop pulling a little more, just enough to let the string loosen so it doesn't hurt you anymore. Susan stands, turns off the kitchen light, and leaves the room in dimness. The folded paper is still there. It hasn't disappeared. It will still be there tomorrow. But tonight she doesn't need to tense herself around it, and maybe just that alone is enough for one night. After turning off the kitchen light, Susan doesn't go straight to bed. She pauses for a moment in the hallway where the light from the living room spills out just enough that she doesn't need to turn on another lamp. It's not because there's more to do. Her body just isn't in a hurry. When you're used to living in a constant rhythm of getting things done, standing still for a few seconds can feel strangely unfamiliar. She walks slowly into the living room. On the bookshelf are books she read a long time ago, their spines slightly worn. Susan reaches out and touches one at random. She doesn't pull it out. She just lets her fingertips rest on the cover. There were times she believed she always needed to read more, learn more, improve more. But tonight that sense of lack isn't there. There's only a feeling of enough for now. She sits down on the sofa. She doesn't adjust the cushions. She doesn't search for the perfect position. She just sits the way her body wants to sit. One foot on the floor, the other loosely bent. Her shoulders rest against the back of the couch. A long exhale slips out. Not on purpose, just because there's no longer a reason to hold it in. The string inside her, the one that's been pulled tight all day, doesn't suddenly loosen all at once. It doesn't disappear, but it stops vibrating. Like a string after it's been set down, no longer pulled, no longer touched. The sound fades, not because it's forced into silence, but because there's no more tension acting on it. Susan thinks about all the times she's tried to do things right, on time, by the book, meeting expectations. She doesn't regret those efforts. They brought her here. But maybe not every moment requires the same amount of force. There are stretches of the road where gripping the steering wheel like you're on the highway will only tire you out before you arrive. Outside, the city keeps moving at its own pace. A car passes by, then fades into the distance. A traffic light changes color at the corner. Susan doesn't follow any of it closely. She just knows that things are still happening even without her involvement. There's a quiet relief in that realization, hard to put into words. She rests both hands on her thighs. Her palms feel warmer than the tabletop from earlier. Her fingers curl naturally, not clenched, not stretched open, just there, in between. Maybe this is what people mean by balance, but Susan doesn't need to name it. She just knows this position doesn't hurt. If a thought comes up, she doesn't push it away. She simply notices it. Oh, there it is. And lets it pass like a distant sound. Not every thought needs to be followed to the end. Some only need to be seen. Time seems to slow down. Or maybe the pressure around time has eased. Susan doesn't check the clock. She doesn't need to know how much time has passed. In that quiet space, she realizes something very simple. Peace doesn't come from having everything sorted out. It comes from stopping the sorting, at least for now. She stands up again this time to go to bed. She doesn't bring the printed review with her. She doesn't bring the pen. She only brings a body that feels a little lighter than before. When she lies down, she doesn't force her eyes to close. She lets her eyelids grow heavy in their own time. Some nights, you don't need a solution. You only need permission to stop pulling the string, to let it stay at its natural tension, not so loose that you give up, not so tight that it hurts, just enough that tomorrow when you need it, it can still resonate in a healthier way. If you fall asleep at some point while listening to this story, that's completely okay. There's no right moment to sleep. There's only the moment your body is ready. And if you're still awake, that's okay too. You're in a space that doesn't demand anything from you. No pressure, no urgency, no grading. Just one more breath, in and out. As light as setting down something you've been holding all day. The night doesn't need you to be perfect. It only needs you to stop bracing. Listen for a little while, and then let yourself sleep. Grace had grown used to the way things changed quietly. No big shock, no clear turning point. Just little by little, life shifting into a different shape before she had words for it. That afternoon, she sat on her front porch, the old wooden chair creaking softly each time she shifted her weight. In front of her was a stack of library books she'd already returned tied together with a pale blue cloth ribbon. A breeze moved through the small garden, sending a few dry leaves spinning slowly across the concrete. A very ordinary afternoon, and maybe because it was so ordinary, it carried more thoughts than she expected. Grace was 62, a retired librarian. All her life she'd been comfortable with order books shelved correctly, due dates recorded neatly, everything in its proper place. But since retiring, her days no longer had clear edges. Time wasn't divided into shifts or opening hours anymore. It stretched out longer, looser. And in that looseness, questions began to appear. She picked up one of the books, flipped through a few pages, then set it back down. Not because it wasn't good, but because her mind was somewhere else. She thought about a decision she'd made a few months earlier. Not exactly wrong, but not clearly right either. And what tired her wasn't the outcome, it was having to revisit and reevaluate it again and again. There was an old story Grace had read many years ago about an old man and his horse. When the horse ran away, people said it was a misfortune. When the horse returned, bringing other horses with it, people said it was a blessing. When the old man's son was injured while riding one of the horses, people said it was a misfortune again. And when war came and the injured son didn't have to go, people called it a blessing. The old man listened each time and said only, "Who knows?" Grace didn't remember the story to find an answer. It just surfaced on its own like a familiar piece rising up at the exact moment she needed something uncertain. She looked out at the road in front of her house. A car passed by, then disappeared behind the trees. Things came and went without asking, without explaining. And strangely, she realized how tired she was of trying to label everything as it happened. Good or bad, right or wrong, should or shouldn't. She let the book rest on her lap. Her hands lay one over the other lightly, not clenched, not tight, just resting there. A slow breath came in. Another breath went out a little longer. Some worries don't come from a frightening future, but from the need to know in advance what that future means. We want to name things the moment they appear, as if waiting even a little would leave us lost. But maybe not every path needs a sign at the beginning. Grace leaned forward and picked up a leaf that had fallen on the porch step. It was dry and brittle, easy to break. She turned it between her fingers, then set it back down. A very small action with no purpose. But in that moment, she wasn't thinking about the old decision. She wasn't thinking about what if. There was only the leaf and the afternoon slowly easing along. She remembered times in her life when she'd rushed to a conclusion. Moments that felt like loss, but turned out to be a turn in the road. Moments that seemed like good fortune, but brought their own kind of exhaustion. She hadn't always seen that right away. Usually it came much later. And sometimes even now, she still didn't know what to call certain things. The wind moved across the porch again. The ribbon around the books shifted slightly. Grace stood up, carried the stack inside, and set it on the table. She didn't put them away yet. She just placed them there, as if allowing them to stay unfinished a little longer. When she returned to the porch, the sunlight had softened. Tree shadows stretched farther across the ground. The day was moving into another part of itself without needing anyone to announce it. Grace sat down again. This time she leaned deeper into the chair, not thinking much, not searching for answers, just letting the phrase "who knows" hang somewhere in the air without holding on to it. Maybe peace doesn't come from being certain about what is good or bad. Maybe it comes when we stop judging too quickly, when we allow life to unfold at its own pace, even when we don't fully understand it yet. The afternoon kept moving on, and for the first time in many days, Grace didn't feel the need to move faster than it. Evening arrived more slowly than Grace expected. The light on the porch faded without disappearing all at once, simply changing color. She turned on the small lamp near the door, the kind of light that lets you see without making everything too sharp. The wooden chair creaked softly as she adjusted her position, a familiar sound reminding her that she was still here in this house, in this moment. Grace wasn't thinking much about the old decision anymore. Not because she'd figured anything out, but because the thought no longer demanded to be solved right now. It had stepped back slightly, like setting a book down on a table and realizing you don't need to keep reading tonight. She stood up and made a pot of tea. The sound of the water heating was gentle, not harsh. When she poured it into a cup, steam rose thinly, then disappeared. Grace held the cup with both hands, feeling the warmth soak into her palms. Something solid, present, real. Nothing to interpret. There were years in her life when she believed that if she thought hard enough, weighed things long enough, she could avoid mistakes. But the older she got, the more she saw that some things only reveal their shape after you've already walked through them, not because you lacked wisdom, but because life doesn't move in straight lines. Grace thought of the people who had come into her life and then left. The jobs that once felt essential and slowly turned into memories. Days that felt terrible at the time, but later carried a quiet sense of gratitude. And days that were joyful, yet still passed on, unwilling to stay. None of it formed a neat conclusion. It all simply rested there, layered like thin dust collected over time. And maybe it didn't all need to be wiped away. Some dust only needs to be noticed. She carried her tea back out to the porch and sat down again. The sky was darker now. A few stars were visible, not many, but enough to know that night had arrived. Grace didn't search for familiar shapes in the sky. She just looked and let her eyes rest. In the story of the old man and the horse, what stayed with her most wasn't the events themselves, but the old man's way of meeting them. Not celebrating too early, not falling into despair too quickly, simply standing there witnessing and accepting that he didn't know everything. Maybe that wasn't indifference. Maybe it was a very quiet kind of trust. Trust that not everything needs to be understood right away. Trust that life has its own way of finding balance even when we can't see it yet. Grace took a sip of tea. The warmth moved down her throat, then softened. She set the cup on the small table beside her chair. Her hands rested on her lap again lightly. Her breathing slow and even, not pulled in any direction by a specific thought. If tomorrow brought something unexpected, tomorrow could handle its part. Tonight didn't ask for any decisions. There were no questions that needed answering, just a woman sitting on her porch, listening to the wind, allowing things to be exactly as they were. Darkness isn't frightening when we stop trying to light it up with quick judgments. It's simply part of a cycle. Like night following day, like rest following movement. Grace stood up, put the teacup away, and turned off the porch light. Before going inside, she paused and looked out into the open space in front of her. Not expecting, not predicting, just looking. Maybe peace doesn't come from life always going smoothly. Maybe it comes from stopping the urge to decide right away what is a blessing and what is a loss. From allowing answers to come later or even not at all. Grace closed the door behind her. Inside, the light was soft. She walked slowly toward her bedroom, carrying no more weight than necessary. Today was finished. And like so many days before it could be set down. The night didn't ask her to understand everything. The night only asked her to rest. There are things that ended long ago, yet we still carry them as if they just happened. Not because they still hurt, but because we never truly set them down. And so each step we take in the present becomes a little heavier from what belongs to the past. Henry knew that feeling well. 58 years old, retired, living alone in a small house in the suburbs. That evening, he sat on the front porch, the wooden chair creaking softly each time he shifted his weight. The wind moved through the trees in front of the house, bringing with it the quiet sound of leaves brushing against one another. The air was cool, just enough to make someone pull their collar closer, but not cold. In Henry's hands was an old letter. The paper had yellowed, the edges slightly worn. He didn't read it. He simply folded it, then unfolded it again, a habit that was hard to break. The letter had been there for years. It wasn't long. There was nothing new in it, and yet, every time he held it, he felt a small pull drawing him back. It had happened a long time ago. A misunderstanding. A sentence left unexplained. A decision made when both people were tired. No one raised their voice. No one did anything dramatic. But some cracks form quietly. And then one day, Each person walks a different way. Henry went on with his life. He had work. He had a family. There were days so busy he didn't think about it at all. But on quiet evenings like this, when there was nothing left to finish or fix, the old story returned, not whole, just in pieces. A phrase, a look, a moment he wished he had handled differently. He folded the letter again, this time more neatly, and rested it on his lap. The wind lifted one corner of the paper. Henry placed his hand over it, holding it in place. Not because he was afraid it would blow away, but out of the familiar reflex of holding on. There was a very old story he had once heard about two monks crossing a river. One set the young woman down and kept walking. The other carried her all the way back to the monastery. Henry didn't think of the story as a lesson. He simply noticed something plain and honest. Some things are no longer here yet. We're still carrying them on our shoulders. His shoulder felt slightly sore, not from age, but from the way he was sitting. He shifted, leaning back more deeply into the chair. The wood creaked again. The wind kept moving. Everything around him continued on, untouched by whether or not he held the letter. Henry looked out at the road in front of his house. No cars passed. The street light stretched a long stripe of light across the asphalt. He realized he had carried this old story through many different scenes in his life, through moves, through new relationships, through years that should have been enough to finally set it down. Not because he was stubborn, simply because no one had ever said this. When something is over, you don't have to keep carrying it to prove it once mattered. You can leave it on the riverbank where it ended. Henry opened the envelope, then folded it again, this time without reading it, without straightening it carefully. Just folding it enough so it rested quietly in his hand. A very small feeling appeared, almost too small to notice, as he realized he didn't need to keep replaying that story in his mind right now. The wind picked up slightly. Leaves rustled. Henry placed the letter on the small table beside his chair, not throwing it away, not tucking it safely out of sight, just moving it out of his hands. A sense of lightness came quickly, like setting down an object you hadn't realized you'd been holding the entire time. He rested both hands on the arms of the chair, feeling the cool surface of the wood. His breath flowed out longer than usual. Not from effort, just because there was nothing left to hold. Some nights what exhausts us isn't what happened, but the fact that we're still carrying it from one stretch of road to the next. And maybe not everything needs to be carried back to the monastery. Some things were set down long ago, we just hadn't noticed yet. Henry sat there on the porch with the wind, the gentle darkness, and a very new kind of empty space that had just appeared in his hands. Henry stayed on the porch a little longer. Not because he was waiting for anything to happen, but because his body didn't want to stand up yet. When we finally stop carrying something heavy, the first instinct is often not to move forward, but to pause and feel the lightness of it. He leaned deeper into the chair, letting his back be fully supported, as if for the first time that evening, he was allowing himself to truly sit. The letter rested quietly on the small table. The wind didn't blow it away. Nothing asked him to pick it up again. Henry glanced at it once more, then looked away. Not because anything had been resolved, but because the pull to return to it was gone. Some things once set down simply lose their grip. He thought about the time after it had ended. In the beginning, the memory had been sharp and vivid. Later, it faded, but never disappeared. It turned into a story he told himself again and again, each retelling, adding a detail and emotion. Not to understand it better, but to keep it alive. It occurred to Henry that he had carried that story far longer than it had ever truly existed. What happened lasted only a few minutes. But he had carried it through many years, many seasons, many quiet evenings like this one. Not because it needed to be carried, only because he had never put it down. The wind softened. Insects began their steady chorus somewhere in the darkness. Familiar night sounds that asked for no attention, simply existing. Henry noticed his breathing slow to match that rhythm without effort. When there's no story left to chase, the body remembers how to return to its natural pace. He stood up and brought the letter inside. Not to store it carefully and not to throw it away. He placed it in a hallway drawer among things he hadn't used in a long time. When the drawer closed, there was no sense of loss. Just the feeling of completing a simple, ordinary action. Henry turned off the living room light. The house settled into the familiar dimness of night. He walked slowly toward the bedroom, his steps lighter than when he had gone out to the porch. Not because he was trying to move quietly, but because nothing was weighing his steps down anymore. When he lay down, Henry didn't think about the letter. He didn't think about the other person either. Not because he had forgotten, but because those things didn't need to be present right now. The bed supported his body. The blanket rested over his shoulders. The temperature was just right, needing no adjustment. Small details that became clearer once his mind stopped working so hard. A thought passed through him. Maybe setting something down isn't a great moral act. It doesn't need anyone's approval. It doesn't require an apology or understanding from the other side. It's simply realizing you've walked far enough and you don't need to carry that thing anymore. Henry shifted, finding a familiar position. His breath moved in and out, steady and calm. The old story didn't have an ending, but it didn't need one. Some stories don't need to be closed with words. They just need to stop being carried forward. If one day in the future the memory returns, that's fine. It can come and go like the wind on the porch earlier. But tonight, Henry didn't need to keep it close. Tonight he could let himself be light. The house was quiet. There was nothing that needed to be settled before sleep. No lesson to extract. Just a person who had finally set down something carried for too long. And a body slowly finding its way back to rest. And in that open space, sleep arrived without being invited. It came naturally when nothing extra was brought into the night. Some people don't lose themselves loudly. They don't rebel. They don't fall apart. They simply learn how to shrink. Omar learned that early. He was 28, worked as a personal trainer at a local gym, the kind of place with mirrors everywhere, and music that never quite turned off. From the outside, he looked confident, strong, put together. The kind of guy people assumed had things figured out. Inside, he moved carefully. Not because he was afraid exactly, more because he had learned slowly, quietly, that it was safer not to take up too much space. Safer not to want too much. Safer not to show too much of whatever lived underneath the muscles and routines. That night, after his last client left, Omar stepped outside and started walking. The gym lights buzzed behind him as the door closed. The street was calmer than usual. A few cars passed. Street lights stretched long shadows across the sidewalk. He kept his hands in the pockets of his jacket shoulders, slightly rounded forward. It was a posture he didn't remember choosing. His body had learned it on its own. As he walked, he replayed small moments from the day. A joke he didn't finish. A thought he didn't say out loud. A decision to stay agreeable instead of honest. None of it dramatic, just familiar. Omar crossed an intersection and slowed down near a quiet stretch of road lined with trees. The leaves barely moved. Somewhere a bus hissed as it pulled away. He stopped under a streetlight and leaned back against a pole, the cool metal pressing through his jacket. His chest rose and fell quickly at first, then settled. There was a tightness there. Not pain. More like something held in for a long time. Omar had been praised for being easy most of his life. Easygoing, easy to work with, easy to manage. It sounded like a compliment. It had felt like one. But over time, he noticed how often easy really meant quiet, smaller, less. He rolled his shoulders once, then again, trying to loosen them. The muscles responded slowly, like they weren't used to being asked to soften. Across the street, a stray cat darted from behind a parked car and disappeared into the shadows. Omar watched it go, then let his gaze drift upward. The night sky was darker here than near the gym. A few stars showed through the haze. Nothing dramatic, just enough to notice. He remembered something his grandfather had once said, half joking, half serious. If you raise a lion among sheep, it won't forget how to roar. It'll just forget when it's allowed. Omar hadn't thought about that in years. He wasn't angry. That surprised him. He'd expected anger to show up if he ever slowed down enough to feel what was underneath. But what he felt instead was weight. The kind that comes from holding back, not from being hurt. He pushed off the pole and started walking again, slower now. Each step landed more deliberately. His breath matched his pace without effort. As he walked, he noticed how often his mind tried to correct him. Don't get too big. Don't make it awkward. Don't push. Those thoughts weren't cruel. They were protective. Old. Well practiced. Omar didn't argue with them. He just noticed them the way you might notice background noise you've lived with for so long you forgot it was there. At the next corner, he stopped again. This time he closed his eyes briefly and took one deeper breath than usual. His chest expanded. His shoulders lifted slightly, then dropped. Nothing happened. No rush, no breakthrough. But something shifted. It felt like standing a little straighter, not to look confident, but because there was no reason to keep folding inward. Omar opened his eyes and looked down the street. The road stretched out empty and quiet. He could walk any direction he wanted. For the first time that night, he noticed how much strength it took to keep pretending to be smaller than you are, and how much energy might come back if you stopped. He didn't need to roar. He didn't need to prove anything. He just needed to stop acting like he was something he wasn't. Omar took another step forward, then another, letting his arms swing naturally at his sides. His hands came out of his pockets. His shoulders stayed relaxed. The lion hadn't disappeared. It had just been patient. And patience, he was beginning to realize, wasn't the same as weakness. Omar kept walking, not toward anything in particular. The street curved gently, guiding him without asking questions. His footsteps sounded different now, not louder, just steadier, like they belonged to him again. He passed a closed storefront, its windows' dark reflections faint. For a moment he caught sight of himself in the glass, the outline of his body, broad shoulders, solid frame, a presence that had always been there even when he tried to soften it. He didn't stop to look longer. He didn't need to. What surprised him most was how tired he felt, not the heavy exhaustion of a long day, but a softer kind. The kind that comes after you've been holding something in for a very long time and finally let your grip loosen. Omar slowed near a small park tucked between apartment buildings. The gate wasn't locked. He stepped inside and sat on a bench beneath a tree. The wood was cool. The air smelled faintly of leaves and damp earth. He rested his elbows on his thighs and let his hands hang loosely between his knees. Fingers relaxed, jaw relaxed, breath easy. For years he had thought that being himself meant being too much, too intense, too direct, too loud in a world that seemed to reward smooth edges and quiet compliance. So he learned how to blend, how to fit, how to keep his head down. But sitting there now, he realized something simple. The effort it took to shrink had been constant, invisible, but relentless. No one had asked him to disappear. He had just learned how. A breeze moved through the leaves above him, producing a soft, uneven rustle. Omar followed the sound with his attention, letting it rise and fall without naming it. His breathing slowed naturally, syncing with the rhythm around him. There was no sudden clarity, no declaration of identity, just the sense that something old had been set down beside him on the bench. He remembered moments he had almost forgotten, times when he laughed too loudly and then quickly checked himself, times when he wanted to speak and swallowed the words instead, times when his body felt powerful, alive, and he immediately toned it down so no one would feel uncomfortable. None of those memories hurt tonight. They felt distant, like scenes from a movie he no longer needed to rewatch. Omar leaned back against the bench and looked up at the branches. A few stars peeked through the gaps. Not many, just enough. A lion doesn't need to roar to know what it is. It doesn't rehearse its strength. It doesn't apologize for its size. That truth settled in quietly. Omar noticed how calm his body felt when he stopped trying to manage how he appeared. When he wasn't anticipating reactions, when he wasn't adjusting himself in advance. It wasn't confidence. It was relief. He stood up and left the park, walking back toward his apartment. The streets felt familiar again, but softer, less like a stage, more like a place to pass through. At his door, he paused, keys in hand, not because he was hesitating, just because he could. Inside, the apartment greeted him with stillness. He kicked off his shoes and left them where they landed. The lights stayed off. The darkness didn't feel heavy. Omar moved through the space and sat on the edge of his bed. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, and let his head drop slightly. A long breath escaped him unplanned. His shoulders lowered another inch. He realized then that reclaiming himself didn't require a performance. It didn't require confrontation or explanation. It only required permission he could give himself. To stand as he was, to breathe as he was, to exist without translation. Omar lay back and stared at the ceiling. The room was quiet enough that he could hear his own breathing. Slow, even, unforced. The lion didn't need to prove it wasn't a sheep. It just needed to stop pretending. As sleep approached, Omar felt something unfamiliar and deeply welcome. Not excitement, not pride, ease. And in that ease, the body remembered what it had always known. Nothing was wrong with him. Nothing ever had been. The night held him there gently, without expectation. Sometimes what exhausts us isn't the road ahead, but the things we're still carrying from the part of the road already behind us. Tasks that are finished, situations that are over, decisions that have already been made. And yet, in our minds, none of them have truly been set down. Miguel is 45 years old. He works as a cook in a small restaurant. His evening shift ends late. When he steps outside, the sky is already fully dark. The street in front of the restaurant quieter now, with only a few streetlights spilling onto the pavement. He walks home the way he's done for years. Not because he doesn't have a car, but because walking helps him let the day slowly drain away. Over Miguel's shoulder hangs an old canvas bag. Inside, there's nothing heavy. An extra shirt, a water bottle, a few small things. And yet, his shoulder aches. Not because of the bag, but because all day long he's been carrying far more than what's inside it. In his mind, a sentence from earlier keeps replaying. A small moment in the kitchen. A decision he made on instinct, then questioned afterward. I should have done that differently. The thought keeps circling as if it hasn't accepted that the moment has already passed. Miguel stops by a bench along the sidewalk. He sets the bag down at his feet and rubs his shoulder gently. A sigh slips out, unplanned. His body speaks before his mind comes up with anything new. He sits there for a while, watching the few cars that pass by. Each one moves forward and doesn't come back. Only his thoughts keep looping. When he was younger, Miguel once heard a story. A man crossed a river using a boat. After reaching the other side, instead of leaving the boat behind, the man lifted it onto his shoulders and kept walking. Everyone who saw him thought it looked heavy. But the man carrying the boat said, I need it. You never know, there might be another river ahead. Back then, Miguel laughed. But tonight, sitting on the cold bench, the story feels strangely familiar. Not because he's carrying an actual boat, but because he's carrying things that have already done their job. The conversation in the kitchen helped him react quickly in the moment. The worry helped him be more careful. The replaying and rethinking once helped him avoid mistakes. But that river has already been crossed, and he's still carrying everything on his shoulders as if setting it down would mean losing something important. Miguel bends down and opens the canvas bag. He rearranges a few items, even though nothing is really out of place. The movement is simple, unhurried. The soft rustle of fabric is barely audible. And in that moment, the thoughts in his head slow down too. They don't disappear. They just stop crowding each other. Some habits are hard to let go of, not because they're bad, but because they once helped us. We get used to keeping everything just in case, holding on to words we said, small mistakes, all the what-ifs, like carrying the boat simply because we're afraid there might be another river ahead. Miguel closes the bag. This time, instead of putting it back on his shoulder right away, he leaves it on the bench. His shoulders drop slightly on their own. Not much, but enough for him to notice the difference. This lightness doesn't come from life suddenly being easier. It comes from no longer forcing himself to carry more than he needs. He doesn't promise himself that he'll never overthink again. He doesn't set a goal to let go perfectly. He just notices that maybe he doesn't need to carry everything right now. Miguel stands up and lifts the bag onto his shoulder again. But this time he adjusts the strap so it sits more comfortably. Not too tight, not too loose, just enough to keep moving. The road home is still there, but his shoulders feel lighter than they did a moment ago. If you're listening to this and recognize yourself in the habit of carrying things that are already over, that's okay. You don't have to throw them away right now. Just ask gently, do I still need this for this part of the road? The answer might not come right away, but even asking the question is already a step onto the other shore. Miguel continues walking home. The familiar street, the familiar houses, windows glowing or dark in different ways, nothing new. And yet something inside him feels slightly different, as if something has been set down, even though he can't quite name what it is. The bag is still on his shoulder. It hasn't disappeared. But it no longer feels like it's pulling him backward. Each step feels lighter, not because the distance has shortened, but because he's no longer carrying the repeated thoughts from the shift that just ended. There are moments when things are happening that we need to hold on tightly. We have to remember details. Think ahead, react quickly. But once those moments are over, continuing to grip them only makes us more tired. Like a boat that helped us cross a river, useful then. But once the water is behind us, it becomes nothing more than weight on our shoulders. Miguel stops at his front door. He stands there for a moment, his hand resting on the doorknob, not rushing to open it. Inside, it's quiet. No one is waiting for an explanation. No one is asking whether he did a good job today. No one needs him to think any further. He opens the door, steps inside, and closes it softly behind him. The room is dimmer than the street outside. Only a small light glows in the kitchen corner. Miguel sets the bag down on a chair this time, not keeping it close to him, just placing it there like something that has finished what it was meant to do. He washes his hands at the sink. The water runs steadily, neither hot nor cold. The sound of it covers everything else. As he washes, he notices his hands feel more tired than usual. Not from heavy work, but from gripping for too long. As he rubs in the soap, his fingers loosen on their own, little by little. A thought appears. I should have said that differently. Then another follows. But this time he doesn't chase them. He doesn't argue. He doesn't try to fix them. He simply notices them arrive and lets the sound of the water carry them away. Not because he's especially good at letting go, just because right now he doesn't need to carry them with him. Miguel dries his hands, turns off the kitchen light, and walks toward the bedroom. He doesn't turn on the main light, just enough to see where he's going. When he sits on the edge of the bed, he feels the mattress take his weight. No effort needed, no balance to maintain, nothing else required of him. Some nights, you don't need to figure out a new way to live. You just need to give yourself permission to stop carrying things that have already done their job. Old words, small mistakes, situations that have already closed. They don't vanish. But you don't have to bring them with you everywhere. Miguel lies down. He doesn't adjust the pillow over and over. He doesn't search for the perfect position. He just lies there like someone who has finished the day's walk. His breathing slows naturally. No counting, no instructions, just following his body. If you're still listening right now, still awake, that's okay. There's nothing being asked of you. You don't need to let go of everything. You don't need to set it all down at once. You only need to stop carrying more. Maybe tomorrow you'll need that boat again. You'll need to think. You'll need to be careful. And that's completely fine. But tonight, with no river in front of you, you can let it rest on the shore. Miguel closes his eyes, not to force sleep, but because his eyelids have grown heavy on their own. In the quiet room, there's nothing to solve, nothing to prove. Just a day that has passed and a body that's allowed to rest. If you fall asleep at some point while listening to this story, that's perfectly natural. And if you haven't yet, you're still exactly where you need to be. Nothing is late. Nothing has gone wrong. It's just an ordinary evening, and you don't need to carry the whole day into your sleep. Listen a little longer, or fall asleep now if you'd like. The wind arrived before Tyler had time to think about it. Not strong, but steady enough to make the wooden cabin creak softly, as if the place were breathing along with the forest. Tyler sat in a chair by the window. A flashlight hung from a metal hook above the work desk, its warm yellow light swaying gently with the movement of the air. He was 34, a park ranger used to narrow trails. Uneven ground, small changes most people never noticed. But that night, after his shift had ended, after the forest had gone dark, after no one needed him to make decisions anymore, a familiar sense of unsteadiness showed up in its own quiet way. Tyler reached for the flashlight and adjusted the angle of the head. A familiar motion. The beam shifted slightly, then settled. There was no perfect position, only one that was good enough for now. He thought about an afternoon a few weeks earlier, standing on a wooden bridge stretched over a ravine. The wind had been stronger that day. The bridge had trembled lightly beneath his feet. He'd had to adjust every step, every breath, not to stay still, but to keep moving across. At the time, he hadn't called the feeling fear. It was simply attention pulled fully into each small movement. Now inside the cabin, that feeling returned, not because of height, not because of immediate danger, but because of questions without clear answers. Work. Where to live. Choices coming up ahead. Nothing was falling apart, but nothing was settled either. Like a rope stretched between 2 points, always asking the person walking it to make constant adjustments. Tyler set the flashlight down on the desk. The soft sound of metal touching wood filled the room. He leaned back in the chair and let his shoulders drop. An old habit inside him wanted to find perfect balance first, to make sure everything was stable before allowing himself to rest. But the forest had never taught him that. The forest had taught him that staying upright doesn't mean staying still. The wind moved again. The flashlight beam wobbled slightly. Tyler didn't fix it right away. He let it tilt, then find a new resting place on its own. The light still filled the room. Not perfectly, but enough. Some fears come from believing that balance is a destination. That if we find the exact right position, the exact right decision, the exact right rhythm, everything will stop shaking. But life rarely stays still long enough for that. It keeps shifting like the wind outside, like the trees that sway and bend while staying rooted. Tyler stood and took a few steps across the small cabin. The wooden floor made its familiar sounds beneath him. He cracked the window open slightly. Cold air rushed in, carrying the damp scent of leaves and soil. He breathed in slowly, then let it out, not trying to hold balance, just letting his body adjust on its own. In his mind, the image of a tightrope walker appeared clearly. Not a performer in a circus, but anyone trying to move through an uncertain stretch of life. That person isn't standing still on the rope. Every second brings tiny corrections, leaning left, leaning right, stepping forward, stepping back, half a step. There's no moment that feels finished. Tyler realized he'd once believed that needing to adjust meant something was wrong. That if he were still correcting, he wasn't okay yet. But long patrols through the forest had taught him otherwise. Constant adjustment was a sign of life. A tree doesn't survive wind by staying rigid. It bends, yields, and then returns. He went back to the chair and sat down again. This time he didn't lean all the way back. He sat closer to the edge, feet planted firmly on the floor. The sense of contact was clear. Not to lock himself into a fixed state, but to feel where he was right here, right now. For a brief moment, Tyler noticed that his fear wasn't about falling. It was about not knowing which way to lean. And once he saw that, the pressure eased. Because if there's no single perfect direction, then every small adjustment matters. Outside, the wind softened. The flashlight beam nearly stilled. Tyler didn't rush to feel relieved. He knew the wind could return at any time, but he also knew he didn't have to wait for it to disappear completely in order to rest. He placed his hands on his thighs and let them stay there. His breathing evened out. Not deeper, not longer, just steady. Maybe balance isn't something you achieve and then hold forever. Maybe it's the act of continuing forward, even while the rope is still gently moving beneath your feet. The night in the forest didn't stand still. but it knew how to balance itself. The wind moved through, then settled like a long breath finally released after a full day. Tyler sat quietly in the cabin. The soft rattle of the window was gone now. What remained were distant sounds, insects' leaves brushing against each other, tiny noises that usually went unnoticed during the day. He stood up and turned off one of the lights. The room dimmed the edges of things no longer clearly defined. Tyler didn't turn on another lamp. He let his eyes adjust to this new level of darkness. He didn't need to see everything clearly to know where he was. The wooden floor still made gentle sounds beneath his feet as he walked. He moved more slowly now, not because he was afraid of stumbling, but because there was no need to rush. It felt different from the times he'd tried so hard to stay balanced before. Back then his body had tensed, as if any movement meant failure. Now each small sway felt like part of a larger motion. Tyler opened the door to the porch. He didn't step all the way outside. He stayed at the threshold where the light from inside met the darkness beyond. The air was cooler, the breeze light. He rested his hand on the wooden doorframe, feeling its familiar roughness. There are moments in life when we think we need a clear decision to make everything stable. And then there are moments when the only thing required is a series of very small adjustments, just enough not to fall. Not moving forward too fast, not stepping too far back, simply staying where you are. Tyler remembered the first time he learned how to cross a suspension bridge in the forest. The instructor hadn't told him to stand still. They told him to look ahead, keep his breathing steady, and accept that the bridge would sway. Swaying wasn't a sign of danger. It was a sign of flexibility. He stepped back inside and closed the door. The cabin became quiet again. The flashlight hanging from the hook was still tilted at a slight angle. Tyler didn't adjust it. He let it stay that way. The light was still enough, and its unevenness no longer bothered him. He sat back down in the chair this time, leaning fully into it. His body found its position without effort. His feet rested firmly on the floor, not because everything had become stable, but because he was no longer resisting movement. In the image of the tightrope walker, what matters isn't never wobbling. It's that each time the body sways, the person knows how to move with it, then return. No panic, no stiffness, no need to prove control. Tyler's breathing slowed without him noticing when it happened. Not intentionally deep, just slower, like the rhythm of the forest once night has fully settled. Thoughts still appeared now and then, but they didn't demand immediate action. They passed through like the wind outside, arriving, then leaving. He placed a hand on his chest and felt his heartbeat steady. Not fast, not slow. Just the heart of someone resting after a long day. A quiet trust formed that he didn't need to resolve everything before allowing himself to stop. The wind might return later. Tomorrow the questions might still be there. But right now, there was no rope to cross. No height to look down from. Just a cabin, a person breathing, and a moment safe enough to rest. Tyler closed his eyes. Not to fall asleep yet, just to let his eyelids grow heavy. The dim light of the flashlight softened, then faded into something no longer clearly seen. Balance, it turned out, wasn't about everything being still. It was about trusting that adjustment is possible, even when you don't need to make one right now. The night held the rest for him. Some bursts of anger arrive so fast that we don't even realize we're angry yet. A brief interruption, an unexpected movement, a tiny sense of being crossed, and suddenly the chest tightens, the hands clench, and the mind starts building a story. We believe someone did something wrong, that someone deserves blame. But sometimes what we collide with is just an empty boat. Jason was 23, a senior in college, still getting used to driving on the freeway every day. That night, he left the library later than planned. It was fully dark now, streetlights stretching ahead like an endless stream of light. Jason turned on his signal, merged into traffic, and tried to keep just enough distance so he wouldn't have to brake hard. A car in front of him suddenly cut into his lane. No signal, no warning. Jason jolted his foot, hitting the brake harder than necessary. His heart jumped. A familiar rush of heat surged up. What kind of driving is that? The thought flashed through his mind before anything else could. He gripped the steering wheel, eyes locked on the car ahead. For a few short seconds, Jason's world shrank down to that one vehicle. He imagined the driver's face, imagined carelessness, imagined disrespect. With each image, the anger sharpened a little more. Then traffic slowed. The space between cars widened. Jason's breathing slowed with it without him trying. As the red glow of brake lights reflected across the windshield, he noticed how tightly he was holding the wheel. His fingers had gone pale. His shoulders were raised higher than usual. He loosened his grip just a little, not to forgive anyone, just because his hands were tired. And in that very small moment, another thought slipped in. What if there was no one in that car to be angry at? What if it had simply drifted across without intention, without malice, without aiming at him at all? That thought didn't erase the anger right away, but it interrupted the story in Jason's head, like speaking quickly and suddenly forgetting the next word. There was a gap, and in that gap, he noticed something. He was angry at an image his own mind had created. The car ahead kept going. It didn't look back. It didn't react. There was no sign it knew what Jason was thinking. Maybe the driver was exhausted. Maybe distracted by something else. Maybe it was just a moment of carelessness, or maybe there was nothing to it at all, just two paths crossing briefly, then moving on. Jason looked at the flow of cars around him. Each one had lights. Each one was moving. But he knew nothing about the people inside. He didn't know what kind of day they'd had, what they were carrying in their minds, or whether someone among them was angry at him for something equally small. He breathed in, then out. Not deep, not long. Just enough for the tightness in his chest to ease. The heat didn't spread anymore. It was still there, but it wasn't growing like a fire, no longer being fed. There was an old story Jason remembered from a life skills class about a boat drifting on a river. When two boats collide, if you see the other boat is empty, you don't get angry. But if you believe someone is steering it, anger rises immediately. Not because of the collision itself, but because of the idea that someone did this to you. Jason didn't think of it as a lesson. He just felt it happening right now on this road in his own body. The lane change was already over, but the anger had only just begun, and now it was beginning to slow. He turned on the radio, then turned it off right away. The sound wasn't needed. Tonight, the steady engine noise and the slow flow of lights were enough. Jason let the car move with traffic no faster, no slower, just staying in his lane. Sometimes we don't need to win a moment. We don't need someone else to admit fault. We just need to see that what we ran into might not have had anyone there to be angry at in the first place. And if that's true, why keep holding the anger at all? Jason kept driving freeway lights, stretching out ahead. The story in his head was no longer racing. It had settled, giving way to a strange but comfortable space. Traffic gradually thinned as Jason exited the freeway. The smaller roads leading back to his neighborhood were much quieter streetlights spaced farther apart, their light falling in short patches across the asphalt. The alertness from earlier was gone. His hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, not gripping just enough to keep the car steady. The anger had slipped somewhere behind him now, like a car that had taken a different turn. It hadn't disappeared completely. It just wasn't right in front of him anymore. When it no longer had to be watched, it naturally began to lose its sharp edges. Jason noticed his breathing had evened out. Not because he was trying to calm down, but because there was no longer a story to keep running. No one needed to be right. No one needed to be wrong. There was only the road opening ahead and the ordinary movement of driving home. He stopped at an intersection. Red light, yellow, green. The changes happened steadily, indifferent to the mood of anyone waiting. Jason watched the colors shift and felt something inside him shift too slowly without being pushed. When he pulled up in front of his apartment, he turned off the engine but didn't get out right away. Not because he was thinking about anything, just because this moment was calm enough to stay in for a few extra seconds. The metal cooled. The space around the car closed in like a small cocoon. Jason opened the door and stepped out. The night air was cooler, brushing lightly against his skin. He locked the car, heard the short beep, and walked away. He didn't look back at the road he had just traveled. There was no need. Inside the small room, he turned on the desk lamp. The soft yellow light was gentle enough not to fully wake him up. Jason set his keys on the table and dropped his backpack on the floor. Everything landed where it belonged, without needing adjustment. There was a quiet comfort in realizing that not every moment requires a reaction. He washed his hands, the water running steadily, a familiar feeling. The water carried away road dust, fatigue, and the faint leftover trace of anger. Jason let it run a few seconds longer, then turned off the faucet. No ritual. Just the end of an action. When he lay down on the bed, he didn't think about the other car anymore. He didn't think about himself in that moment either. The images had lost their weight. They didn't need to be held onto to prove anything. Some collisions don't need to be carried all the way to the end of the day. Jason turned onto his side, finding his usual position. The blanket came up to his shoulders. The room was quiet with no sudden sound. And he noticed something very simple. Anger needs an object to hold on to. When the object dissolves, anger has nowhere left to cling. The empty boat had passed long ago. The river kept flowing. Nothing was broken. Nothing needed fixing. There had only been a moment that ended and a body that didn't need to keep carrying it. Jason closed his eyes. He didn't force himself to sleep. He let his eyes rest. His breath moved in and out, steady and light. No intention, no plan, no reaction required. If more collisions come tomorrow, that's okay. We don't always remember that the boat might be empty, but tonight, just having seen it once was enough for his body to relearn what it feels like not to be angry. The room settled into silence. No conclusion, no reminder, just a slow current guiding everything back to its place. And within that current, sleep arrived very gently, as if it had been there all along, simply waiting until no one was colliding with anyone anymore. There are nights when loneliness doesn't feel sharp. It feels quiet, like a room with the lights off, where you can still sense the outlines of everything, but nothing reaches back. Grace knew that kind of quiet well. She was 62, a librarian in a small town, the kind of person who moved through the day, gently returning books to their places, speaking softly, keeping things in order without making a show of it. People liked her. People trusted her. But most days, by the time she locked the library doors and drove home, the world's attention felt like it had already moved on to somewhere else. That evening, she didn't turn on the TV. She didn't scroll her phone. She made a cup of tea and carried it out to the porch, where a single porch light glowed warm against the dark. The air was cool enough to wake the skin, but not cold enough to hurt. Somewhere, crickets kept their steady rhythm. A neighbor's dog barked once, then stopped as if even it didn't want to disturb the night for too long. Grace sat down on the porch steps, teacup warming her hands. The chair beside her stayed empty, not in a dramatic way, just in the quiet, ordinary way that empty chairs can be. A few years ago, the empty chair had felt unbearable. She would notice it immediately, like a missing tooth. Now it simply existed, a fact, a shape in the room. Still, sometimes she wondered what her life looked like from the outside. Quiet job, quiet house, quiet evenings. She didn't feel sad all the time. She didn't feel broken. She just felt unseen. Not by one person in particular, not in a way that could be fixed with a text message. More like the feeling that if she disappeared from the world for a few days, the world would continue without much pause. Grace took a slow sip of tea. It was too hot, and she smiled at herself for forgetting that part. She set the cup down beside her and rubbed her thumb over the rim, feeling the smooth ceramic. Across the small yard near the fence line, something pale caught her eye. A faint patch of color in the dark. She leaned forward, squinting. Earlier that week, she had thrown a handful of mixed seeds into the soil near the fence, not really expecting anything. A neighbor had mentioned wildflowers offhand, saying they made the yard feel less lonely. Grace had nodded politely, then bought a small packet at the hardware store on her way home from work. She hadn't told anyone. It wasn't a project. It wasn't self-improvement. It was just a small thing to do with her hands. Now, in the porch light and the thin moonlight, she could see that something had actually grown. A few small flowers had opened simple, bright faces, looking up into the dark as if the night didn't bother them at all. Grace stood up slowly and walked into the yard, careful not to step on the little patch of new life. The grass was cool under her feet. The earth smelled damp, honest. She crouched near the flowers and looked closer. They weren't dramatic flowers. Not the kind people buy at expensive shops. Not roses, not orchids. These were the kind that show up in empty lots, along highways in places no one points at. And yet here they were, open, bright, completely unconcerned with whether anyone noticed. Grace felt something loosen in her chest. Not a big release, just a softening, as if a tight knot had been sitting there quietly and finally stopped pulling. She stayed crouched there looking at them. The petals were delicate, slightly uneven. The stems thin but upright. They didn't look like they were trying to be anything else. It struck her in the simplest way that they hadn't grown to be admired. They had grown because that's what they do. Grace thought about how often she measured her own life by outside signals, invitations, messages, praise at work, people remembering her birthday, people needing her. And when those signals didn't come, she assumed something about herself. Maybe I'm not interesting. Maybe I'm not important. Maybe I'm not enough. The wildflowers didn't seem to ask those questions. They didn't bend toward applause. They didn't wait for permission. They simply opened. Grace reached out and touched one petal with the tip of her finger. It was cool and soft, almost weightless. The flower didn't flinch. It didn't change its mind. It remained what it was. A car passed far away, headlights sweeping faintly across the fence. Then the darkness returned to its steady shape. Grace sat back on her heels and let herself breathe. In and out, slow, natural breaths that didn't ask anything from her. She realized she had been living as if her value depended on being witnessed, as if beauty required an audience, as if a life only mattered when someone else reflected it back to her. But the small patch of wildflowers didn't need a mirror. Grace stood up and went back to the porch. She picked up her tea again, now warm instead of hot. She sat down on the step and looked out at the yard. The empty chair was still empty. The night was still quiet. And yet something felt different. Not in the circumstances, in her chest. She didn't feel fixed. She didn't feel suddenly fulfilled. She just felt less needy for proof. The wildflowers continued to hold their small brightness in the dark, like a gentle reminder you didn't have to fight for your own worth. Sometimes Grace thought the most honest kind of beauty is the kind that keeps blooming even when no one is watching. And maybe that kind of blooming was allowed for her too. Grace stayed on the porch for a long while after that, long enough for the night to deepen around her. The crickets settled into a slower rhythm. The air cooled just enough that she pulled her sweater closer around her shoulders. Not because she was cold, but because the weight felt comforting. She watched the small patch of wildflowers from where she sat. They were harder to see now, their colors muted in the dark, but she knew they were still there, still open. still doing what they had done all day without interruption. Grace noticed how often she had lived as if she were on pause, waiting for someone to notice her effort, waiting for an invitation, waiting for a sign that her life was meaningful in some measurable way. She had waited quietly, politely, the way she had learned to do most things. But sitting there now, she realized something gentle and surprising. The waiting itself had been exhausting. Not because it was dramatic, but because it kept her turned outward, scanning for reassurance instead of resting in what already existed. She took another sip of tea and let the warmth spread through her chest. The night didn't rush her. The yard didn't ask her to be different. Even the empty chair beside her felt neutral now, no longer a symbol of lack. Just a piece of furniture holding its place. Grace thought about the wildflowers again. How they had grown without certainty, without feedback, without an audience to tell them they were doing it right. They hadn't bloomed for the night. They had bloomed in it. That difference felt important. She stood up slowly and walked back into the yard, careful with her steps. The grass brushed against her ankles. She stopped near the flowers once more and knelt down, resting her hands on her thighs. Up close, she could see tiny imperfections she hadn't noticed before. A petal with a small tear, a stem slightly bent, a flower that hadn't fully opened yet. None of it looked wrong. Grace felt a quiet recognition move through her. Her own life had been like that too, uneven, unremarkable in places, still unfolding in others. She had spent so much time believing she needed to be more finished, more impressive, more clearly defined. But nothing here looked finished either. Nothing needed to be. She stayed there until her knees began to ache slightly, then rose and brushed the dirt from her palms. The flowers stayed where they were. They didn't need her attention to continue. Back inside, Grace moved through the house without turning on many lights. The familiar rooms felt softer in the dimness, edges less sharp, expectations lower. She washed her cup, listening to the quiet rush of water, then set it upside down to dry. In the bedroom, she paused by the window and looked out once more. The yard was mostly shadow now, the flowers invisible unless you knew where to look. She smiled to herself. So much of life, she realized, was like that. Present, alive, meaningful, whether or not it was clearly seen. Grace lay down and pulled the blanket up around her. The bed held her weight easily. Her breath slowed without instruction. The day, with all its small moments and quiet hours, began to loosen its grip. She didn't make any promises to herself, didn't vow to stop caring what people thought, didn't rewrite her story in her head. She simply let herself rest. Somewhere outside, the wildflowers stood in the dark, open and steady, not asking for approval, not dimming themselves because no one was watching. They would still be there in the morning. And so would she. Grace closed her eyes, carrying that thought with her, not as an affirmation, not as a lesson, but as a soft truth the body could understand. Nothing was missing. Nothing had to be proven. The night wrapped around the house, gentle and complete, and let everything be exactly as it was. Some thoughts start out very small. so small that if you're not paying attention, you might not even notice when they first appear. But if you keep holding them, keep turning them over in your mind, they begin to grow. Not because they're true, but because you've given them too much time and attention. Priya is 28 years old. She works as a data analyst. Her job revolves around numbers, charts, streams of information constantly moving across a screen. That evening, she's sitting on her usual train ride home. The city slides past the window lights, stretching into long streaks. She's wearing noise-canceling headphones, but no music is playing. She just wants things to be a little quieter. In Priya's hand is her phone. The screen is off, but her mind isn't. An email from earlier that afternoon, her reply, a response from a coworker, nothing serious, no criticism, no clear consequences. And yet, in her head, the story keeps replaying, each time with a new detail added. I should have explained that more clearly. What if they think I'm unsure? Maybe I missed something. Each thought arrives small, like the very first snowflake landing in your palm. But Priya doesn't let it melt. She turns it over, thinks more, analyzes more. And before she realizes it, that tiny flake is no longer just a speck. The train stops at a station. Some people get on, others step off. Priya stays seated. She adjusts her scarf, pulling it closer around her neck, even though the car isn't cold. A familiar motion, almost comforting. For a brief moment, she notices her shoulders are a little tense. Not painful, just tight. She lets them drop slowly. No one tells her to. Her body has just been holding that position long enough. As her shoulders lower, her breath deepens slightly. And in that small opening, Priya notices something her thoughts didn't start out big. They became big because she kept rolling them, like a snowball. No one begins with a large one. You start with a tiny handful. But as you roll it across the ground, more snow sticks. The longer you roll, the heavier it becomes, until you can't even remember where it began. Priya looks out the window. A familiar grocery store. A diner with its lights already off. None of what she's seeing has anything to do with that email. But her eyes keep looking, and while they do, her mind loosens its grip on the old story. Not because she's trying to forget, but because something else is being seen. She reaches up and adjusts her headphones, feeling the cool plastic under her fingers. The sensation is clear, immediate, real. For a few seconds, there are no charts, no sentences, just her hand and the object she's touching. And in that moment, the snowball in her mind doesn't grow any bigger. There's something Priya has started to notice on evenings like this. Negative thoughts rarely grow on their own. They need her participation. They need her to return to them. They need all the what-ifs and if-onlys. When she doesn't add more, they don't disappear right away, but they stop expanding. The train keeps moving, its rhythm steady, familiar. Her body slowly relaxes into that motion. She doesn't promise herself she'll never overthink again. She knows that isn't realistic. But maybe just for now, she doesn't need to keep rolling the snowball. Priya slips her phone into her bag, not to avoid it, just because she doesn't need to hold it anymore. Her hands rest on her thighs. She exhales slowly. A thought appears, "I'm still thinking." And right after it, a softer realization follows. "I'm noticing that I'm thinking." The difference is small, but that small bit of space makes the snowball feel lighter. If you're listening to this and recognize how your thoughts tend to grow in the evening, that's okay. You're not doing anything wrong. You've just been rolling the snowball without realizing it. And tonight, you might not need to push it any farther. Just pause for a moment, set your hands down, and let the snow melt in its own time. As the train nears her stop, Priya stands up out of habit. She isn't rushing. People move toward the doors, step by step. No pushing, no urgency. She follows the flow, letting her body remember the way. When the doors open, cooler air brushes her face, soft, almost gentle, like a reminder that the world outside is still there, no matter how busy her mind has been. Priya walks home from the station. She's taken this route hundreds of times. The same trees along the sidewalk, street lights spaced at regular intervals. Tonight, the yellow light pools onto the pavement in small circles. She moves from one patch of light to the next, not paying attention to whether she's walking fast or slow, just letting her steps find their own rhythm. The snowball in her mind is still there. It hasn't melted completely. The questions from earlier haven't disappeared. But as she walks, they stop growing. There's no new ground for them to pick up more snow. Just steady footsteps and breath moving in and out with that rhythm. Priya pauses at a familiar corner. A small shop is still open, its inside lights brighter than the street. She stands there for a moment, looking through the window. The shopkeeper is quietly restocking shelves, unhurried, in no rush to finish. The scene has nothing to do with her thoughts, but it's real enough to gently pull her attention away from the story in her head. Sometimes negative thoughts don't need to be defeated. They just need to be brought into the light. Like snow, when it stays in the shade, it can hold its shape for a long time. But when sunlight touches it, no one has to break it apart. It melts on its own, little by little. Priya keeps walking. When she reaches her apartment, she doesn't turn on the main lights. She lets the soft glow from the living room guide her in. She hangs up her coat, takes off her scarf, sets her bag down. Each small action feels like setting down another piece of the day. In the kitchen, she pours herself a glass of water. No ice, not too cold. The water touches her throat, cool enough to notice. She stands there, taking small sips. For a few seconds, no thought continues. There's just the feeling of the water, the swallow, the brief pause between breaths. Priya notices this when she stops rolling her thoughts. They don't gain any more weight. They might still exist, but they no longer control her. They're like small bits of snow left on a sleeve, something that will melt once it meets warmth. She walks into the bedroom. She doesn't check her email again. She doesn't reread messages, not out of fear, just because right now it isn't necessary. She sits on the edge of the bed, takes off her headphones, and places them on the table. Another object set down, When she lies back, Priya doesn't try to coax herself into sleep. She simply lets her body be still. Her breathing slows. Her shoulders soften. The remaining thoughts drift by, not held onto, not pushed away. They come and they go, like thin clouds passing through the sky. If you're listening to this and still awake, that's okay. Maybe your snowball has grown a little bigger. Maybe it's been rolling all day. You don't need to melt it right now. You only need to stop rolling it further. The night doesn't ask you to find answers. The night only asks you to stop retelling the old story. If you fall asleep at some point, that's natural. If you don't, you're still in a safe place. Just a little warmth, a little light, and the snow will know how to melt on its own. Listen a little longer, or let sleep come whenever it's ready. Wherever you are tonight, I'm grateful you chose to spend this quiet time here. If these stories help you rest, you're welcome to subscribe and return whenever you need a gentle place to land. And now, you don't need to do anything more. Let the night hold what you can't carry. And if sleep comes, let it come.